What happens when quiet dignity clashes with loud prejudice at 30,000 feet for Dr. Alani Adebayo, a brilliant CEO in a world that often refuses to see her? A simple flight was about to become a battleground. She was calm, she was composed, and she was about to be denied entry to her own private jet. The flight attendant saw a problem. The entitled couple beside her saw an opportunity for scorn. They all made a colossal mistake because they had no idea who they were dealing with, and the fallout would be more devastating than they could ever imagine. The Aerolux executive terminal at Teterboro Airport was a hushed sanctuary of wealth. The air, thick with the scent of expensive leather and freshly brewed espresso, was a world away from the chaotic terminals of commercial aviation. Here time bent to the whims of the ultra-rich. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the polished chrome of bespoke furniture, and the silent sweeping wings of the Gulf Stream and bombardier jets parked on the tarmac. Dr. Alani Adebayo sat quietly in a plush armchair, nursing a bottle of still water. She was the epitome of understated elegance. Her attire, a simple black cashmere turtleneck, tailored grey trousers, and supple leather loafers from Bottega Veneta, spoke of a confidence that required no announcement. Her hair was styled in neat, intricate braids that cascaded over her shoulder, and the only piece of jewelry she wore was a simple, elegant watch on her wrist. She was absorbed in a thick binder, filled with technical schematics and financial projections, her brow furrowed in concentration. To the casual observer, she was a portrait of serene focus. Across the lounge, a different kind of wealth was on full display. Richard and Penelope Davenport were holding court, their voices a sharp counterpoint to the lounge's tranquil atmosphere. Richard, a portly man with a florid complexion that hinted at a life of rich food and fine wine, was booming into his phone about a hostile market and underperforming assets. He wore a suit that was likely expensive, but fit him poorly stretched taut across his midsection. On his wrist, a gaudy diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch caught the light with every expansive gesture. His wife Penelope was a study in sharp angles and sharper disdain. Thin and severe, she was draped in a fur stole that seemed wildly inappropriate for the climate-controlled lounge. A cherry-red Hermes Birkin bag sat possessively on the seat beside her, a beacon of her status. She surveyed the room with an air of bored ownership, her gaze occasionally flicking toward Alani, with a flicker of something unreadable, a micro-expression of appraisal and dismissal. The announcement for their flight, a charter to Aspen, finally crackled softly through the lounge's hidden speakers. Now boarding Phoenix Air Flight 734 at Gate 1. Richard snapped his phone shut. Finally, he grumbled loud enough for half the lounge to hear. If I have to listen to this hold music one more second, I'm buying the damn company just to fire their entire IT department. Penelope gave a thin, humorless smile and rose, gathering her fur and her Birkin. The couple, trailed by a porter handling their mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage, made their way toward the gate. Alani, noticing the call closed, her binder tucked it into her sleek leather briefcase and followed at a respectable distance. At the gate leading to the jet bridge, a young flight attendant stood with a clipboard and an unnervingly bright, fixed smile. Her name tag read Tiffany. She greeted the Davenports with a saccharine sweetness that dripped with deference. Mr. and Mrs. Davenport, welcome aboard. Such a pleasure to have you with us today. She chirped, her eyes wide with admiration as she took in Penelope's bag and Richard's watch. Yes, lovely. Richard grunted, waving a dismissive hand as he brushed past her. Penelope offered a curt nod, not breaking her stride. As Alani approached, Tiffany's demeanor underwent a subtle but instantaneous transformation. The brilliant smile tightened. Her posture stiffened. Her eyes, which had been full of warmth for the Davenports, turned cool and assessing. She held up a hand, physically barring Alani's path. "May I help you?" Tiffany asked. The question was simple, but the tone was laced with a professional suspicion that was anything but. It was the kind of tone reserved for someone who had wandered into a place they clearly didn't belong. Alani offered a polite, patient smile. "Yes, I'm here for the flight to Aspen." Tiffany's eyes did a slow, deliberate scan of Alani, from her simple loafers up to her braided hair. It was an invasive, insulting appraisal. "I see," she said, her voice a full octave lower than it had been for the Davenports. "This is a private charter, ma'am. It's fully booked." "I'm aware," Alani replied, her voice remaining even. "I believe you'll find everything is in order." From just inside the jet bridge, Penelope Davenport had paused ostensibly to adjust her stole, but her ears were clearly tuned to the exchange. She shot a conspiratorial glance back at Tiffany. Richard, ever impatient, bellowed from further down the ramp, "What's the hold-up? Let's get this bird in the air." Tiffany seemed emboldened by their presence. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass and identification," she stated, her tone shifting from suspicion to accusation. "Of course," Alani said, reaching for her briefcase. But before she could open it, Tiffany spoke again, her voice dripping with condescension. "You know," she began, leaning in slightly, as if sharing a helpful secret. "The commercial terminal is on the other side of the airport. It's easy to get confused. They have flights to Denver, and you can usually get a connecting shuttle to Aspen from there. It's really quite efficient." The implication was as clear as the plate glass window behind them. "You don't belong here. You can't afford this. You must be lost." Alani's hand froze on the latch of her briefcase. Her patient smile finally faded, replaced by a look of profound weariness. She had faced this particular brand of smiling, polite prejudice 1,000 times in her life, in boardrooms, at scientific conferences, in luxury boutiques. It was a poison delivered with a pleasant tone, a knife twisted with a gentle hand. "There's no confusion," Alani said, her voice now carrying a quiet, steely edge. "I am exactly where I'm supposed to be." Behind Tiffany, Penelope Davenport let out a small, almost inaudible scoff. It was the sound of prejudice confirmed, of superiority validated. The storm which had been gathering in the quiet, polite atmosphere of the lounge was about to break. Richard Davenport, his patience frayed to a thread, stomped back from the jet bridge entrance. His face was a thundercloud of irritation. "What in God's name is the problem here? We have a schedule to keep." His gaze fell upon Alani, and his expression curdled from simple annoyance into outright contempt. He jabbed a thick finger in Alani's direction, addressing Tiffany, but making sure Alani could hear every word. "Is this the issue? Did security let someone slip through? This is supposed to be an exclusive service. We pay a premium for privacy and efficiency." The way he said privacy was heavy with meaning, a clear insinuation that Alani's very presence was a breach of it. Tiffany, caught between an impatient, high-value client and the woman she had profiled, made her choice. She aligned herself with the Davenports, her professional smile becoming a mask for her aggression. "I'm handling it, Mr. Davenport," she assured him, then turned her full attention back to Alani. "Ma'am, as I said, this is a fully booked private flight. I don't have you on my passenger manifest. There must be a mistake." "There is a mistake, but it's not mine," Alani stated calmly, though a flicker of frustration now showed in her eyes. She decided to bypass the obstruction. "Perhaps you could just get the captain. I'm sure he can clear this up immediately." This suggestion seemed to offend Tiffany on a personal level. It was a challenge to her authority, minuscule as it was. "The captain is busy with pre-flight checks. He doesn't deal with ticketing issues. I am the sole flight attendant for this charter, and entry to this aircraft is at my discretion. She puffed out her chest, slightly empowered by her role as gatekeeper. Penelope glided back to her husband's side, her voice a silken whisper that carried like a siren's call. "Richard, dear, perhaps the woman is a guest of one of the other passengers, though I can't imagine who." She let the sentence hang in the air, a perfectly crafted social grenade. The unspoken words were clear. None of our kind would associate with her. Richard seized on the idea. "Is that it?" he boomed at Alani. "Are you with the catering staff, or maybe maintenance? If you're here to service the plane, you should have used the service entrance. This area is for passengers only." The accusation was so nakedly racist, so steeped in the assumption that a black woman could only be present in a service capacity, that the air grew thick with unspoken ugliness. Alani felt a familiar cold fury begin to coil in her stomach. It was an old companion, one she had learned to control with immense discipline. She had built a global enterprise, shattered glass ceilings in the cutthroat world of biotechnology, and advised world leaders, yet here, on the threshold of her own property, she was being mistaken for a janitor. "I am not with the catering staff," she said, her voice dangerously low and controlled. "And I assure you, I am a passenger. Now for the last time, either you let me board, or you get your captain." Tiffany, now fully committed to her confrontational stance, crossed her arms. "I'm not going to ask you again. You are not on my list. You are not getting on this plane. If you don't leave the gate area immediately, I will have airport security escort you out." It was the final escalation, the point of no return. Alani looked from Tiffany's defiant face to Richard's smug sneer to Penelope's icy satisfaction. She saw in them a microcosm of a world she fought against every day. They were not just three individuals. They were a system of belief, a fortress of prejudice built on assumptions and entitlement, and she knew with a weary certainty that reasoning with them was futile. Arguing would grant their bigotry a legitimacy it did not deserve. Explaining her wealth or her position would be a performance for their benefit, a plea for acceptance she would never make. So she didn't. Instead, a profound and unnerving calm settled over her. The frustration vanished, replaced by a focus as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. She gave them one last, long look, memorizing their faces. Then she slowly, deliberately reached into her briefcase. The Davenports and Tiffany watched, expecting a driver's license, perhaps a credit card she would try to use to prove her worth. They smirked in anticipation of her humiliation. But Alani didn't pull out a wallet. She pulled out her sleek, black smartphone. Her thumb moved gracefully across the screen, tapping a single name from her contacts. She lifted the phone to her ear, her eyes never leaving Tiffany's. "One moment, Wawaisa," she said, her voice as cold and clear as the air at cruising altitude. The phone rang once. "Captain Corrigan." A man's voice answered, crisp and professional. Alani's voice was devoid of emotion. "Miles, it's Alani Adebayo. I'm standing at the door of the jet. We have a security situation." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "A security situation. Dr. Adebayo, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she replied, her gaze boring into Tiffany, whose face had begun to drain of color. "But your flight attendant is refusing me entry. She is at this moment threatening to call security to have me removed from my own aircraft. Please come to the galley, immediately." She disconnected the call without waiting for a reply. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Davenport's smirk faltered. Penelope's smugness flickered with the first seed of doubt. And Tiffany. Tiffany's face had crumpled into a mask of pure, unadulterated dread. The name Dr. Adebayo hung in the air, a name she should have known, a name that was surely on the master file for the aircraft's owner. The power dynamic in the small space had not just shifted, it had been obliterated. The gatekeeper was about to face the queen of the castle, and she had just tried to throw her out the front door. Less than 30 seconds later, the door to the aircraft hissed open. A tall, silver-haired man in a crisp pilot's uniform with 4 stripes on the epaulets emerged. Captain Miles Corrigan was the picture of authority, his face a stern, no-nonsense mask. He had been flying the world's elite for over 20 years, and he had a sixth sense for trouble. The words security situation and Dr. Adebayo in the same sentence had sent ice water through his veins. His eyes immediately found Alani. "Dr. Adebayo, my sincerest apologies. What is going on here?" He completely ignored Tiffany and the Davenports, his focus solely on the woman who signed his paychecks. Before Alani could answer, Tiffany, seeing her career flashing before her eyes, rushed to defend herself. Her voice was high-pitched and shaky. "Captain, this woman, she wasn't on the passenger list. She has no ticket, no identification. I was just following protocol to ensure the safety and security of the flight and our clients." Captain Corrigan turned his head slowly to look at her, his expression one of utter disbelief. It was the look a master craftsman might give an apprentice who had just used a priceless chisel to open a can of paint. "Protocol," he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "You were ensuring the security of the flight from the owner of the jet." The words hit the air with the force of a physical blow. Richard Davenport, who had been puffing his chest out moments before, seemed to deflate. His ruddy face went pale, a stark contrast to his usual florid complexion. Penelope let out a tiny, horrified gasp, her manicured hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes, wide with shock, darted from the captain to Alani, as if seeing her for the first time. The simple cashmere, the understated loafers, the quiet confidence, it all clicked into place, not as a sign of inadequacy, but as the hallmark of a person so wealthy and powerful they had nothing to prove. But it was Tiffany who felt the full impact. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a pasty, sickly pallor. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The woman she had dismissed, insulted and threatened, was not just a passenger. She wasn't just a VIP. She was the VIP. Alani finally spoke, her voice cutting through the thick, stunned silence. She looked directly at Tiffany, whose eyes were swimming with panic. "You asked me for my boarding pass." Alani said, her voice even, but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "You demanded to see my ticket to board this aircraft. Tiffany, let me be perfectly clear. I don't have a ticket." She paused, letting the word sink in, twisting the knife of Tiffany's catastrophic error. "You don't need a ticket when you own the jet." The three of them froze. It was a complete and total system shutdown. Their entire world view, a carefully constructed hierarchy where they sat comfortably at the top, had been vaporized in a single sentence. The woman they had deemed unworthy, an interloper, a service worker, held all the power. Captain Corrigan stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. "Tiffany Miller," he said, his voice resonating with grim finality. "Pack your personal belongings. You are relieved of your duties effective immediately. A representative from Phoenix Air will meet you back in the terminal. You are not to set foot on this aircraft again." Tears began to well in Tiffany's eyes as the full scope of her disaster became clear. "Captain, please. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Alani interjected, her voice still quiet, but now ringing with righteous anger. "A mistake is forgetting to offer a passenger a drink. A mistake is misplacing a piece of luggage. What you did was not a mistake. It was a choice. You looked at Meu and you made a judgment based on a set of ugly, preconceived notions. You chose to believe the loud, arrogant man and his snide wife over a woman who was calm and respectful. You chose prejudice, and now you will live with the consequences of that choice." She then turned her gaze to the Davenports, who were standing frozen, looking like statues of obsolete gods. "As for you," she said, her eyes locking onto Richard's. Richard, desperate to salvage the situation, tried to muster some of his old bluster. He forced a sickeningly jovial laugh. "Well now, a simple misunderstanding. Dr. Adebayo, is it? Forgive us, we had no idea. A true self-made woman I admire, that. Richard Davenport Dynamics." He stuck out his hand, a desperate, pathetic gesture of peace. Alani looked at his outstretched hand as if it were a venomous snake. She didn't take it. Instead, her eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of recognition dawning. The name. Davenport Dynamics. She had seen it just this morning. It was in the binder she had been reading in the lounge, the binder containing the due diligence report on a struggling industrial manufacturing company her firm, Adebayo Innovations, was considering acquiring. A lifeline acquisition that would save Davenport Dynamics from bankruptcy. Richard was flying to Aspen for a series of meetings. The final crucial meeting of that trip, the one that would decide the fate of his entire company, was scheduled for the day after tomorrow. It was with the founder and CEO of Adebayo Innovations. He was flying to meet her. Alani's expression remained unreadable, but a slow, cold understanding dawned in her mind. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for dramatic irony. Richard Davenport saw the lack of recognition in her eyes, and his desperation grew. Adebayo Innovations, the biotech firm. My God, he laughed again, a high, nervous sound this time. What a small world you're the one we're flying to meet with. This is incredible. The look on Penelope's face was one of pure, unadulterated horror. The social misstep had just morphed into a multi-$100-million financial catastrophe. She looked at her husband, her expression screaming, "What have you done?" Alani finally broke the silence. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried the chilling finality of a guillotine's blade. "Mr. Davenport," she said slowly, "I believe you are mistaken. We no longer have a meeting." The 4 words, "we no longer have a meeting," hung in the air, more devastating than any shouted insult. For Richard Davenport, they were a death sentence for his company, his legacy, his entire world. The forced bonhomie evaporated from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed panic. What do you mean?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "The deal, the acquisition, my board. We've been working on this for 6 months. You can't just cancel it." "I can," Alani replied, her voice unwavering. "And I have. My company, Adebayo Innovations, was founded on principles of progress, meritocracy, and respect. We seek partners who share those values. In the last 20 minutes, you and your wife have demonstrated that you are fundamentally incompatible with the culture I have built." She turned to Captain Corrigan, who was watching the scene unfold with grim satisfaction. "Captain, please have Mr. and Mrs. Davenport's luggage removed from the hold. They will not be flying with us today." "With pleasure, Doctor," Corrigan said, his voice crisp. He keyed the intercom. "Ground crew, this is the captain. We need to offload all luggage tagged for passenger Davenport, immediately." Penelope, who had been a silent pillar of horror, finally found her voice. It was a desperate, pleading squeak, a stark contrast to her earlier haughty tone. "Please, Dr. Adebayo, we are so terribly sorry. It was a dreadful misunderstanding. My husband, he's under a lot of stress." "We all are Mrs. Davenport," Alani said, turning her cool gaze upon her. But stress does not grant one a license for bigotry. It merely reveals what is already in one's character. She glanced at Penelope's fur stole and her ostentatious Birkin bag. You judged me by my appearance. Allow me to return the favor. You present as people who value status above substance and prejudice above principle. My company doesn't invest in such liabilities. Richard's panic turned to rage, the last refuge of a man who has lost all control. You can't do this. This is a violation of something. I'll sue you. I'll sue you and your whole damn company for breach of contract. Alani almost smiled. It was a chilling, humorless expression. Mr. Davenport, I recommend you consult your lawyers before making threats. You'll find that until a final agreement is signed, our discussions constituted nothing more than a non-binding letter of intent. There is no contract to breach, however. She added, her voice dropping, given your public behavior and defamatory assumptions, which have been witnessed by the captain and your now unemployed flight attendant, I suspect my legal team would have a much more interesting case against you, should you choose to pursue this. The fight drained out of Richard as quickly as it had appeared. He was beaten, utterly and completely. He looked around the luxurious jet bridge at the gleaming fuselage of the Gulfstream G700, at the impassive face of Captain Corrigan, and finally at Dr. Alani Adebayo. He wasn't just losing a deal. He was being cast out of a world he thought he owned. Just then, 2 ground crew workers arrived with a luggage cart. They nodded to the captain and began communicating with the baggage handlers in the hold. A few moments later, the first of the Davenport's dozen Louis Vuitton suitcases thudded onto the cart. The sound was horribly final. Tiffany, who had been crying silently, was gently but firmly escorted back toward the terminal by an airport official who had been summoned by the captain. Her career in the exclusive, tight-knit world of private aviation was over. No charter company would risk hiring a flight attendant who had insulted and attempted to eject a jet owner. She would be blacklisted before her tears had a chance to dry. As their last bag was loaded, Richard and Penelope stood adrift, stripped of their power and prestige. They were just 2 people on a jet bridge they were no longer welcome on. Richard's expensive suit now looked cheap and ill-fitting. Penelope's fur seemed garish and cruel. Their armor of wealth had been pierced, revealing the small, ugly people beneath. Alani gave them one last look, not of triumph, but of profound disappointment. Find your own way to Aspen, she said, before turning her back on them and stepping into the luxurious cabin of her aircraft. Captain Corrigan gave a curt, dismissive nod to the Davenports. This way, he said, gesturing them back to the terminal, his tone leaving no room for argument. As they trudged back through the lounge, they had dominated just 30 minutes prior. The other passengers and staff watched in silence. The story had already begun to ripple through the terminal. The loud, important man and his haughty wife had been summarily humbled and ejected. Their walk of shame was quiet, excruciating, and absolute. Richard's phone began to buzz insistently. It was his CFO, no doubt, calling for an update on the Aspen trip. He looked at the screen, his hand trembling, and let it go to voicemail. What could he possibly say? How could he explain that he had not only failed to secure the deal, but had personally, spectacularly insulted the one person on Earth who held the fate of his company in her hands, leading to its certain demise? The unraveling had just begun. Inside the cabin of the Gulfstream G700, the contrast was absolute. The turmoil of the jet bridge gave way to a serene, custom-designed interior of cream leather, dark walnut wood, and brushed platinum accents. The air was cool and smelled faintly of chamomile. Alani settled into a plush swivel chair and took a deep, steadying breath. The anger had subsided, leaving behind the familiar ache of weariness. Captain Corrigan entered the cabin, his expression one of deep professional mortification. "Dr. Adebayo," he began, his voice low. "On behalf of myself, Phoenix Air, and the entire crew, I cannot apologize enough. What happened out there was inexcusable, unforgivable." Alani waved a hand, dismissing the need for further apology from him. "It wasn't your fault, Miles. It was a failure in character, and I suspect in training. We will need to have a serious discussion with the charter management company about their vetting and anti-bias protocols." "Absolutely, Doctor. Consider it my #1 priority," he affirmed. "We'll be ready for departure as soon as the ground crew is clear." He gave a respectful nod and retreated to the cockpit, leaving Alani to her thoughts. She pulled out her phone again, this time to send a secure message to her executive assistant Ava Chen, a woman renowned for her ruthless efficiency. To Ava Chen, subject urgent Davenport Dynamics. Ava, cancel my meeting with Richard Davenport. Effective, immediately terminate all acquisition talks with Davenport Dynamics. Issue a formal notice to their board citing irreconcilable differences in corporate values and leadership ethics. Do not provide further detail. When the market opens Monday, be prepared for their stock to collapse. We may be able to acquire their patent portfolio for pennies on the dollar out of bankruptcy later this year. Keep an eye on it." The reply came back in less than a minute. From Ava Chen, subject, urgent Davenport, Dynamics understood. The termination notice is being drafted and will be sent within the hour. Enjoy your flight, Alani. With a few taps on a screen, a corporate empire began to crumble. Back in the Aerolux terminal, the Davenports were adrift in a sea of their own making. Their mountain of luggage sat beside them like a monument to their folly. Richard's phone was now vibrating non-stop calls and texts from his board members, his CFO, his investors. The news was traveling fast. A junior board member who was supposed to join him in Aspen had just texted, "Richard, what the hell happened? We just received a termination notice from Adebayo Innovations. The deal is off." Richard stared at the message, his blood running cold. "It's over," he whispered, his voice hollow. "It's all over." Penelope, for the first time in their 25 years of marriage, looked at her husband, not with admiration or affection, but with pure, undiluted contempt. "You," she hissed, her voice venomous. "You and your big stupid mouth, your arrogance. I told you to be careful. I told you this deal was everything." "Me," he sputtered, rounding on her. "You were right there with me. I can't imagine who she's a guest of. You said you were enjoying it just as much as I was." Their hushed, vicious argument was a pathetic spectacle. They were turning on each other, the last resort of the defeated. The social humiliation was just the beginning. The financial ruin would be tidal. Davenport Dynamics was heavily leveraged, counting on the Adebayo acquisition to save it from crushing debt. Without that infusion of cash, the company would default. Bankruptcy was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. Their personal fortune, tied up almost entirely in company stock, would be wiped out. The houses, the cars, the Patek Philippe, watch the Hermes Birkin, all of it was built on a foundation that had just been dynamited. Within hours, the story, stripped of its nuance and amplified by gossip, would ricochet through the elite circles of New York, London, and Hong Kong. By Monday morning, financial news outlets like Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal would be reporting on the sudden, mysterious collapse of the Adebayo Davenport deal. The stock would plummet in pre-market trading and be worthless by noon. Richard Davenport would be forced to resign in disgrace. For Tiffany Miller, the consequences were more immediate and personal. When she was met by the regional manager for Phoenix Air, there was no discussion, no second chance. She was fired for gross misconduct and a violation of the company's core principles of client service. The manager informed her that, due to the severity of the incident involving a high-net-worth client, a negative report would be placed in her permanent file. In the small insular world of corporate and private aviation, such a report was a career death sentence. She would be lucky to get a job on a budget commercial airline, a world away from the luxury and prestige she had so desperately coveted and so foolishly wielded as a weapon. As the Gulfstream G700 taxied onto the runway, Alani looked out the window. She saw the Aerolux terminal shrinking in the distance. She felt no joy, no sense of victory. The incident had left a bitter taste in her mouth. It was a stark reminder that no matter how much she achieved, no matter how many barriers she broke, there would always be people who saw her as less, who would demand she prove her right to exist in spaces she had earned 10 times over. The jet's powerful engines roared, and the plane accelerated down the runway, lifting gracefully into the sky. Below, the Davenports were just beginning to navigate the wreckage of their lives. Above, Alani was already focusing on the future, on the next scientific breakthrough, the next investment, the next challenge. She had not sought this confrontation, but when it came, she had met it with the most powerful tool at her disposal, the truth. And the consequences for those who chose to deny it were as severe and unyielding as gravity itself. Months passed. The Aspen ski season came and went, leaving behind a dusting of spring snow on the majestic peaks. The financial world, ever voracious and quick to forget, had largely moved on from the spectacular implosion of Davenport dynamics. New deals were forged, new fortunes were made and lost, and the name Richard Davenport became a cautionary footnote in business school ethics classes. For Alani Adebayo, life continued its relentless pace of innovation and achievement. Adebayo Innovations launched a groundbreaking new diagnostic tool that revolutionized early cancer detection, earning Alani further accolades and solidifying her reputation as a visionary leader. She traveled the globe, speaking at conferences, advising governments, and overseeing her vast and ever-expanding empire. Yet the memory of that cold encounter on the jet bridge lingered a faint but persistent shadow. It served as a constant reminder of the insidious nature of prejudice, the way it could surface in the most unexpected places, and the importance of remaining vigilant. One crisp autumn afternoon, Alani found herself in a familiar setting, the Aerolux executive terminal at Teterboro. She was awaiting her jet for a flight to Zurich, where she was scheduled to address a global health summit. As she settled into one of the plush armchairs, a figure hesitantly approached her. It was Tiffany Miller. The transformation was stark. The bright, confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a palpable air of anxiety and weariness. Her once meticulously styled hair was now pulled back in a simple, somewhat messy ponytail. The crisp uniform had been exchanged for a worn, ill-fitting cardigan and faded jeans. Her eyes, once sharp with judgment, now held a haunted, almost pleading quality. Alani recognized her instantly, though a part of her wished she hadn't. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her, a flicker of satisfaction that justice had been served, a pang of something akin to pity for the young woman's evident hardship, and a deep weariness at having to revisit that unpleasant episode. Tiffany stood a few feet away, clutching a tattered manila envelope in her hands. She looked as if she might bolt at any moment. Finally, she managed to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Adebayo." Alani looked up from her tablet, her expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Miller, isn't it—" Tiffany flinched slightly at the formality, the lack of any softening in Alani's tone. Yes, it is. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but—" I needed to try. She took a tentative step closer, her eyes darting around the quiet lounge as if expecting someone to order her to leave. Alani set her tablet aside. "What is it, Ms. Miller?" Her voice was cool, devoid of any invitation for pleasantries. Tiffany swallowed hard, her hands tightening on the envelope. I wanted to apologize. Properly. For what happened that day. My behavior was inexcusable. There's no excuse for it. I acted out of prejudice, and it was wrong. Terribly wrong. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. I lost my job, of course, and, well, I haven't been able to find anything else in the industry. The report, it followed me everywhere. Alani listened in silence, her gaze steady and unwavering. She had heard apologies before, often hollow and self-serving. She waited to see where this one would go. Tiffany continued, her voice, gaining a shaky resolve. Losing my job was devastating. But honestly, Dr. Adebayo, the worst part, was realizing what I had done. Seeing the look on your face, the disappointment. It haunted me. I had never really thought about my own biases before. I grew up in a certain environment, and I just never questioned things. That day was a brutal wake-up call. She took another step closer, her eyes finally meeting Alani's directly. There was a raw sincerity in her gaze that Alani couldn't entirely dismiss. I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of reading, trying to understand why I acted the way I did. It doesn't excuse it, but I want you to know that I understand now. I understand the harm I caused. Not just to you, but to myself. I lost everything because of my own ignorance. Tiffany held out the manila envelope. I wrote you a letter. It's all in there. I didn't want to just send it. I wanted to say it in person, even if you don't want to hear it. Alani hesitated for a moment. The impulse to dismiss Tiffany outright was strong. This was the woman who had tried to humiliate her, who had made assumptions based on nothing more than the color of her skin. But there was something in Tiffany's demeanor, a genuine remorse that seemed to go beyond mere regret for her professional misfortune. Slowly, Alani reached out and took the envelope. Her fingers brushed against Tiffany's, which were cold and trembling. She didn't open the letter immediately, holding it in her lap like a fragile thing. "What have you been doing since you lost your job, Ms. Miller?" Alani asked, her voice softening slightly. Tiffany managed a weak smile. "A lot of things I never thought I'd do. I worked as a waitress for a while. It was humbling. Now I'm working at a local community center, volunteering with their youth outreach program. It's different." "Different how?" "Well," Tiffany said, taking a deep breath. "For one thing, no one cares what kind of handbag I'm carrying. They care about whether they have enough to eat. And the kids, they come from all walks of life. Different backgrounds, different stories. It's opened my eyes to a world I never knew existed, even though it was right here all along." Alani listened intently, studying Tiffany's face. The carefully constructed facade of polished professionalism had crumbled, revealing a vulnerability that was surprisingly genuine. "It sounds like you've learned something," Alani said finally. "I have," Tiffany replied earnestly. "I have so much to learn still. But I'm trying, I really am. And I just wanted you to know that your words that day, they stayed with me. They made me look at myself in a way I never had before." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft murmur of conversations and the distant hum of aircraft. Alani still held the unopened letter. She knew that forgiveness was a complex thing, a journey rather than a destination. What Tiffany had done was wrong deeply and personally, But witnessing this transformation, this apparent, genuine remorse, gave her pause. "Thank you for the apology, Miss Miller." Alani said, her voice quiet. "I will read your letter." Tiffany's face crumpled with relief. "Thank you, Dr. Adebayo. Thank you for even listening." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed to say it." With a small, almost imperceptible nod, Alani acknowledged her words. Tiffany took a step back, a weight seemingly lifted from her shoulders. I should go. My bus will be here soon." Alani watched as Tiffany walked away, her figure less assured, less entitled than Alani remembered. She seemed smaller, somehow stripped of the uniform and the assumptions that had once defined her. Alani opened the manila envelope and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat but slightly shaky. She began to read. The letter was long and heartfelt. Tiffany wrote about her upbringing, the subtle and not-so-subtle biases that had been ingrained in her worldview. She didn't offer excuses, but she tried to explain the mindset that had led to her appalling behavior. She wrote about the shock and shame she felt when Captain Corrigan announced Alani's ownership of the jet. She detailed the immediate aftermath, the dismissal, the coldness of her former colleagues, the difficulty of finding new employment. But more than that, the letter chronicled her journey of self-reflection. She wrote about the uncomfortable truths she had been forced to confront about her own prejudices. She described her experiences volunteering at the community center, the diverse faces and stories that had challenged her narrow perspective. She expressed genuine remorse for the disrespect she had shown Alani and acknowledged the privilege she had taken for granted. The letter ended with a simple plea, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. She didn't expect Alani to forget what had happened, but she hoped that one day, perhaps Alani might believe that she was truly trying to be a better person. Alani finished the letter, her brow furrowed in thought. She didn't know if she fully believed in Tiffany's transformation. Prejudice was a deeply rooted thing, and a single incident, even a catastrophic one, might not be enough to eradicate it entirely. But she couldn't deny the sincerity that seemed to emanate from the pages. A part of her, the part that believed in justice and accountability, felt a sense of closure. Tiffany had faced the consequences of her actions, and those consequences had been significant. But another part of her, the part that had always fought for a more just and equitable world, recognized the potential for growth and change, even in those who had once been part of the problem. As the boarding announcement for her flight to Zurich echoed through the lounge, Alani carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. She stood up, her briefcase in hand. She glanced in the direction Tiffany had gone, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. The incident on the jet bridge had been a stark reminder of the battles that still needed to be fought. But perhaps, just perhaps, it had also been a catalyst for change, not just in the lives of those directly involved, but in the small interconnected world they inhabited. The long shadow of consequences had fallen, reshaping not only the lives of the prejudiced, but also offering a glimpse of the possibility of redemption, however arduous the path might be. And in Alani's world, where innovation and progress were the driving forces, even the most deeply ingrained biases could, with effort and genuine remorse, begin to be dismantled. As she walked towards the gate, Alani knew that she might never fully forgive Tiffany Miller, but she also knew that she had read the letter, and in doing so, she had acknowledged not just the pain of the past, but the fragile hope for a more enlightened future. The journey towards true equality was long, and it required not just the condemnation of prejudice, but also the recognition of the possibility for change, one difficult step at a time. The hiss of the cabin door ceiling was a sound of finality. Alani stepped into the familiar sanctuary of her jet, the quiet hum of the auxiliary power unit, a soothing balm after the unexpected emotional turbulence in the terminal. She took her seat, the worn manila envelope feeling heavy and significant in her hands. The flight crew moved with practiced, unobtrusive efficiency, offering her a drink, which she declined with a simple shake of her head. Her mind was elsewhere. As the G700 ascended, climbing through a canvas of brilliant blue, Alani looked down at the letter one last time before placing it carefully in her briefcase. Tiffany's apology had unsettled her, not because it was unwelcome, but because of its stark authenticity. The letter wasn't a plea for a job or for money. It was not a gambit for absolution. It was a receipt. A detailed accounting of a debt she was now paying in a currency of humility and quiet service. It was the story of a person who had hit rock bottom and instead of shattering, had begun the painstaking process of rebuilding herself with different, better materials. In contrast, she thought of the Davenports. She hadn't heard their names in months, and she had made no effort to follow their spectacular fall from grace. They had simply ceased to be relevant. But Tiffany's journey threw their fate into sharper relief. Alani picked up the satellite phone and dialed a number from memory. "Evelyn, it's Alani." "Doctor." Evelyn Monroe, the formidable director of the Adebayo Foundation, her philanthropic arm answered with her usual warmth. "Alani, I thought you'd be in the air by now. Everything all right?" "Everything's fine. In fact, I have a new idea," Alani said, watching the clouds drift by far below. "I want to explore a new initiative for the Foundation, something focused on youth vocational training and bias awareness in underserved communities." "That's a bit of a new direction for us." Evelyn noted her mind already working. "Our focus has been primarily on STEM scholarships." "I know," Alani affirmed, "but I was just reminded that opportunity isn't just about access to education. It's also about dismantling the internal and external barriers that prevent people from seeing each other clearly. I'm thinking of partnerships with small, grassroots community centers. The ones doing the real work on the ground, connecting with young adults who are at a crossroads. "I like it," Evelyn said, her voice filled with renewed energy. "It's holistic. It's about building character as well as careers. I'll have my team draw up a preliminary proposal." "Thank you, Evelyn," Alani said, a sense of purpose settling over her. She was channeling the ugly residue of that day into something constructive, transforming a personal slight into a public good. As she ended the call, a notification pinged on her tablet. It was a secure message from her assistant, Ava Chen. The subject line was neutral, "For your information." Attached was a link to an article from a niche financial blog published just that morning. The headline read, "Fallen Titan Richard Davenport's final venture fails amidst acrimony." With a sense of detached curiosity, Alani read the summary Ava had provided. After the collapse of Davenport Dynamics, Richard had attempted a comeback, pouring the last of his liquid assets into a high-risk commodities trading firm. The venture had hemorrhaged money before failing spectacularly last week. The article quoted anonymous former employees who described Richard as erratic, bitter, and paranoid, blaming his downfall on a vicious witch hunt by the woke mob. There was no mention of his own actions. The final paragraph was the most telling. It detailed how the Davenports had been forced to sell their Hamptons estate and their Park Avenue apartment to cover the debts. Penelope, once a fixture on the charity gala circuit, had vanished completely from the public eye. They were last reported to be living in a small rented condo in Florida. Their social world shrunk to nothing. They had become ghosts, haunted by a past they refused to acknowledge. Alani stared at the screen for a long moment. There it was, the stark divergence of two paths. Tiffany Miller, who had less to lose and had lost it all, had chosen the difficult road of self-examination and accountability. She was poor, but she was building a life of purpose. The Davenports, who had lost a fortune but still possessed more than most, had chosen the easy path of blame and bitterness. They were trapped in a prison of their own, making their resentment a far more permanent cage than any financial hardship. With a simple, decisive gesture, Alani dragged the message to the trash and permanently deleted it. The Davenports were no longer a cautionary tale. They were simply an irrelevance. Their story was over. She turned her gaze back to the window, to the vast, empty expanse of sky, and the gentle curve of the earth on the horizon. The echoes of that day had finally faded, replaced not by silence, but by the hum of her own forward momentum. She had work to do. She had a summit to address, a foundation to guide, and a future to build, a future where perhaps there would be a few less Tiffany's and a few more people willing to see the world and each other with clearer eyes. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a woman owning a jet. It was about owning your power, your dignity, and your worth in a world that might try to deny you all three. Dr. Alani Adebayo simply chose not to absorb the poison of someone else's prejudice. Instead, she let their actions have their own natural, devastating consequences. The Davenports and Tiffany Miller didn't just lose a flight or a job, they faced the complete unraveling of their privileged lives because they chose prejudice over basic human decency. Their downfall serves as a powerful reminder that the consequences of our actions, especially our biases, can be swift and absolute. Character is not defined in moments of ease, but in how we treat others when we believe we have all the power. What did you think of the way Dr. Adebayo handled this situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were moved by this story, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where character is truly revealed